But one thing I'd like y'all to consider today, we're really talking about hiring and recruiting and how we can retain top talents and how to go about that. I'd be really curious to know, what are y'all worried about right now and thinking about and concerned about with just what's happening with the job market right now? Obviously, we see these big tech companies, they've got these massive layoffs. We've got, other big important issues going on in the world. Obviously the effects of the pandemic are still around. We've got the war in Ukraine. We've got all of the economy, right? We've got all these things that are obviously affecting us and our businesses. So I'd be really curious if y'all just put in the chat pane, what are you concerned about? What are you thinking about? What are you worried about right now as it relates to not only finding and hiring great talent, but also in retaining the talent that you have? Would love to hear from you. Also, you're free to put in chat pane anything that you want to get out of today. Paul says, aging out workforce. So I imagine you mean, Paul, the changing of the guard and generational differences and things like that. Alex says, finding great talent that wants to do operator work versus higher level strategic work. This is a really big deal, Ali, a really big deal. And oftentimes when I read a lot of content about what's happening just in the job market, you really don't hear a whole lot about entry-level jobs, blue-collar jobs. It's like you hear about all these tech companies and things like that, and that seems to be a lot of the conversation. But yeah, finding great talent that we need to fill all the roles within our company is important. So I love that. Paul says, also attracting younger generation, keeping them long enough to get productive. What's interesting about this, Paul, is I was reading something the other day that is like, we're seeing these changes in the amount of, I think it was Gen Z that's actually entering the workforce. And some of the commentary is there's actually a large percentage of these folks that would rather be influencers on social media than actually go and get a job somewhere. So that's actually what we're competing against now. It's like this new entrepreneurial venture of being a content creator, which I think is just fascinating to me. Paul says, I've got someone like that now. All right. All right, y'all. Well, really glad y'all are here. We're going to go ahead and get started. And for those of you who aren't familiar with me, my name is Zach Basner, and I'm one of our head coaches here at Impact. If you're not familiar with Impact, that's totally okay. We're a sales and marketing training company. We exist to help people insource their digital sales and marketing. That's literally what we do. So we're a little bit different than a typical marketing agency or recruiting agency or, sales training company. We don't try to keep our clients on for these really long retainers. We actually exist so that we can eliminate the dependence on outside influence and help people master these things in-house. I myself have been doing this for about 7 years alongside my mentor, Marcus Sheridan. Some of y'all might be familiar with him. And of course, we specialize in a framework called They Ask You Answer, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. And everything I'm going to share with you today is based on just some of the results that I've been seeing and working with my clients. I work with clients all over the globe, different industries, different types of companies. But the trends tend to be the same, which is interesting, especially when it comes to the way that we communicate. So everything I'm going to share with you today is based on my real experience of applying these things. And I hope that you can apply as many of these things as possible as well. And in order to make sure that happens, I want to make sure we have a good dialogue today. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat pane. Later on, we're going to do a full Q&A session. And if any of you want to come up and actually talk and we can have a bit of a conversation, we will allow you to come off mute. We will give you that special privilege to come off mute and talk with us. But please don't be bashful. Put stuff in the chat pane. Use the Zoom features to their full extent. All right. Can I get a thumbs up from everybody that we're going to do this to our full extent today? I love y'all. Okay. So in order for us to have this conversation, we really have to define some of the framework that I'm going to talk to you about today. Some of you might be familiar with this, and that's fine. This will be a good reminder. If you're not, I will get you up to speed. So in terms of what's been happening in the world and how everything is changing, we have found that our philosophy of They Ask You Answer, while it applies so well to attracting new customers, it also applies so well to attracting talent and recruits for the many positions we have within our companies. And that framework that we use is called They Ask You Answer. They Ask You Answer, put very simply, is your ability to be the best and most helpful teachers in the world at what you do. So if we look at this on the marketing side in terms of how we attract customers, we say to ourselves, look, If there's a certain way that buyers prefer to learn something, that's how we're going to teach it. If there's a certain way they prefer to buy something, that's how we're going to sell it. So we can apply that same methodology to our hiring and recruiting. If there's a certain way that somebody wants to learn about a job or a company, that's how we have to teach it. If there's a certain way they want to go through a hiring process, that's the way we have to run them through the process. Put very simply as well, they ask you answer says, if there's a fear, worry, doubt, concern, question, we must address it, no matter how good, bad, or ugly it might be. This is the framework we're going to go through today. I'm going to show you really how to apply this and some of the results that we've seen. Before we get into that, I've got another question for y'all, and I'm really relying on y'all to give me a lot of great stuff here in the chat pane here. So I want you to consider, if you today were evaluating an organization or looking at a potential job, what are some of the things that you would want to see, know, understand, believe about that organization or about that role to help you feel comfortable enough to pursue it as a potential option for you? So if you today were going to go look for a new role or evaluate an organization, what are the things that would be most important to you? So Ali says how a company prioritizes the workload and the resources allocated to core projects. All right. So in other words, really understanding how that company might philosophize the work that they do and how they go about doing it, how they use the resources that they've got. So I love that, Ali. A lot of people will say things too, like, why do people want to work there? Why do people stay there? So I love that as well. What else, team? What else comes to mind if you were going to evaluate an organization or a job? And I want you to be critical here, so be completely honest. So Leighton says how they communicate with their client base. So this is interesting. We oftentimes can't really get a good gauge on that unless we just look at their website. We can see things like that, but this is great. So understanding how they communicate. You said, Chris says comp and culture, hopefully via the website. Chris, that's a spoiler alert for sure. Hopefully we can learn a little bit about compensation. Absolutely. Paul says their values, their culture, the level of maturity as a small business, perhaps. Love it. Caitlin says the company's core purpose. It's really interesting because for so many of these things that you said, you probably wouldn't have said the same things 10 years ago. In other words, 10 years ago, very much it was the employer had the upper hand to tell you as much or as little as they preferred. It's the same thing that we see in sales and marketing as well, right? You go back 10 years ago, salespeople, generally speaking, had the upper hand in a sales conversation. But now things have changed. Now our customers, our buyers, they have the upper hand. They want to feel like they're in control. And it's the same thing now for many of us in the job market, where that potential recruit really has the upper hand, especially if they're a talented individual. They want to have the power. They're the ones that can make the demands in many ways and say, these are the things I want to know and be comfortable with before I will continue to move forward. I'm obsessed with the studies they do on things like this. In fact, this company called Talent Board, they do these candidate experience reports every year. And the one for 2022 will be coming out soon, but we're going to look here a little bit at the study that they did in 2021. Now, to put this in context for you, this is based on the responses of about 83,000 job candidates that were looking for new jobs at a subset of companies that they studied. And on the left-hand side, what we see is these are the things that people prefer to see in job postings. So when they're actually evaluating a job, a specific role, these are the types of things that they want to see. On the right-hand side, what we see is these are the things that they said they prefer to see about the company and the organization itself. Is this somewhere where I'd want to be working? Now, what's interesting about all these things is as I was looking at this study, I'm going, this is they ask you answer to a T. This only proves further really how much the job market and the folks within that job market are changing. We see things like details of the application, next steps. We see comp, right? Like benefit details, salary ranges, frequently asked questions about the process. What are examples of the career path? What's the day in the life of an employee? What do they have to say? What really is a successful person? Like, what do they look like? What's a successful person in this role actually look like? We've got information on the culture within the company. Somebody said that earlier, why people want to work there, why they stay there, testimonials, values. So we see all these things, right? Now, You could say that as the job market continues to change, and we don't know what's going to happen, some of these things could change in their percentages. But the principle here is we're hearing loud and clear. People want to have a good sense as to what they're getting into, and they want to be able to access this information on their own time, because you can't spend 4 hours with them trying to explain all these things. That's where great content and great teaching really comes into play. Now, within They Ask You Answer, we have something called the Big Five. And the Big Five is really 5 categories of major questions that people have when they're evaluating either how they spend their money or how they make money. The Big Five is a bit of an oxymoron, though, because these are the things that we know people obsess over, but it's also the things that people, meaning companies, don't like to talk about. So these are things like salary and pay. Typically, we don't like to talk openly and honestly about salary and pay. We want to go, we'll wait till we get them a little bit through the interview process, and then we'll ask them what they want to make, and then we'll make a decision then. We don't like to talk about problems that happen within a career or within a company. We don't like to address the ugly stuff. We don't like to compare things. As companies, we don't like to compare ourselves to other potential employers, because we want to say, well, we don't want to, put that on their radar. But these are the things that we would want to know as that job seeker. We don't like to talk about the best companies to work for, especially if it might not be us in a certain category. And for whatever reason, we don't like to actually review our company based on the employee experience. For the most part, we leave it up to the people that either leave the company or the people that still work there, and they turn to things like Glassdoor and all of those reviews. But we don't actually, as companies, make a conscious effort to review the employee experience. These are the Big Five. These are what really move the needle in hiring and recruiting today, because this is how we have been trained to think. We can ask these questions. The question is, are we as organizations willing to address them? I'm going to tell you a quick story about a company that I worked with, and I'm still working with them. I've been working with them for about 1.5 years. And this company is called Anderson Trucking Service, and they're a great company, a great place to work. And they had a big problem when they came to me. They said, Zach, we need to hire about 1,000 new drivers over the course of the next year, and we can't spend more money doing it. Because essentially what was happening was they were spending all of their money with recruiting agencies and these different types of agencies that would help bring them these drivers. And so their cost of acquisition or cost to hire was very high. The process of going from the recruiters, the outsourced recruiters, to the internal recruiters was clunky. And so that was wasting a bunch of time and energy. They knew there was a better way. And so we knew they were going to have to create a lot of content to solve this problem. Now, I'm pleased to tell you that because they did that, they are breaking every conceivable record I think you could possibly have within this industry in terms of hiring. And they've lowered their cost to hire. And they've been able to fire many of these agencies that weren't really doing much for them, and therefore they don't have to pay for that anymore. And the people that come to them already love them because they've been taught so well. And the recruiters have a much easier job hiring them. And what we see here in this chart here is their organic traffic and direct traffic to their hiring website. So it's driveforats.com is their hiring website. We see they had somewhere around about 500 visits organically to their website per month. And now they've just surpassed 11,000 organic visits to their website in October. They get roughly 250 contacts per month via this content that they produce. It's fundamentally changed hiring and recruiting for them. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, Zach, we're not trying to hire 1,000 people to do anything. And that's okay. The principles are still the same, because we still want to get the best people, I'm sure. Even if you're only hiring 5 over the next couple months, you want to make sure you get the best 5. My goal for you is that you would have a pipeline that is full of great, talented individuals. You never have to settle, and you never have to worry about hitting your goals because you get the right people. So diving into the Big Five, let's talk about the first and perhaps the most controversial of the Big Five, which is salary and pay. And I'm hoping you're appreciating, everybody, this very culturally relevant stock imagery that I've got here. You can tell this is post-COVID. All right. So here's the thing about this, right? So you probably see these studies, and you probably know this intuitively, that people want to see at least a number or a range of comp when they're looking at a job. You've probably been told that before, and you probably know this. Here's the interesting thing with this. Even if we put a range or a number in the job posting, does that mean that they truly understand the value? In other words, if they went somewhere else and there was a higher salary, would they really understand the difference between the two? If they went somewhere and they found a lower salary, would they really understand it completely? Just like we can't assume customers understand value, we can't assume job candidates understand compensation the way we do either, right? So even just the range isn't enough anymore. This is a big problem for the folks at ATS. In fact, when I went and I remember the first couple of weeks of me working with Anderson Trucking Service, I went and I listened to a phone call that a recruiter had with a potential driver. And when he told him, because they are like a top pay certified employer, when he told this potential recruit, here's about how much you would make, the guy said, "You have to be lying to me." Red flag, by the way, right? Because first of all, shows this guy doesn't trust what this guy's saying to him, but also shows that he doesn't really understand the compensation, because he thinks that this guy's just trying to pull my leg, just try to tell me whatever I want to hear. That told me in that moment, we're not doing a good enough job at explaining compensation. If we tell to somebody and they think we're lying, then we haven't fully educated them. And so we started to address this with content on their website, and they hired a content manager just for driver recruiting, by the way, that produces about 3 articles per week that they're able to use in recruiting. One of these things was 8 truck driver pay structures explained. This way they can help these drivers self-discover really how pay works and how much they could potentially make. We did things like top paying trucking jobs in 2022. So we can give people a sense as to these are the types of roles that actually make the most money. So again, we're never hiding anything from them. We did things like, how much will I make as an over-the-road driver? How does an independent contractor, truck driver get benefits? And specifically, how will I get paid at ATS? Because they've done this, they don't have to spend so much time in the recruiting process helping people really believe or understand the way that compensation works, not only at ATS, but in the industry overall. Have you ever had somebody, you'll just give me head nods on this perhaps, you ever had somebody you've ever experienced where you explained what they could potentially make, and you knew in your minds, they just see the number there, they don't fully understand what the full compensation would be? You ever felt that way before? We also have folks nowadays that once if you get to the point where you say, so what are your desired earnings? They're not going to want to answer that question, because what they think is, well, they're going to take whatever I say and it could be significantly less than what I could potentially make here. Problem. Trust could be lost in that moment. Credibility could be lost. So here's what I'd ask you all to consider. In your unique industry, or with that job that you're trying to fill, what are those major salary or pay related questions or concerns that they have? Even the ones that they might not necessarily say. I imagine you could probably think of at least a couple right now in this moment. So what I would prompt you to do is, based on that, if you could address it in an article or in a video, and you could address those things earlier on in the hiring process, how would that change the conversations that you have with the recruits on around salary and pay? Next up in the big 5 is problems. Another big problem that ATS had, and I'm not sure if any of y'all have ever worked in trucking, but this was new to me. They have these new fancy dash cams that they can put on the dashboard of one of these big semis. And what this camera will do is it records basically everything that's going on out on the road. And if there's any sort of unsafe maneuver, it will record that footage and it'll automatically send it to Big Brother. I don't know who it goes to, but right, it's like somebody's keeping them accountable here. Now, that's pretty good. I mean, I was glad to hear that that's the case, that we're trying to keep these drivers safe and keep everybody safe on the road. But the problem was, this goes over like a turd in the punch bowl for drivers, because they feel like, I got now somebody watching every move that I make, literally every mile of me driving. Now I've got somebody that's watching what I'm doing. They don't like that. And so here's the thing. They had a choice in that moment. We either address this or we don't. The problem, of course, if they didn't address it, is that they were going to continue to get bombarded online and just like destroyed about these cameras, because there's a lot of like gossip that goes around in this industry, and they were going to continue to deal with this. And so they chose, we have to address this thing. And so they did. And so they pulled in a real driver, and he talked about his experience with these dash cameras. And he said, hey, one time I had an unsafe maneuver and it recorded it and it sent it to my manager. And there was, there's a conversation that happened there, but ultimately I'm glad that it happened. And I'm glad that ATS finds this so important, because it's keeping us all safe while we're out on the road. It's not a big deal. I didn't like it at first, but it's okay now that I've had the opportunity to use it. So now we've addressed this potential negative and we've turned it into a positive. Wouldn't have happened if they weren't willing to address this very clear problem. We didn't stop there. We also talked about, hey, here are things that could potentially disqualify you from getting hired as a driver. Here are 5 common driver mistreatment problems and how you can get more respect. And this is a big thing too. I didn't realize this. Truck abandonment is a pretty big thing. Like literally these guys will just leave like a trailer on the side of the road, and it's like a pretty big deal. And there's consequences with that. So they started talking about these things that could happen and really helping these drivers understand the industry, even if they've been working in it for a long time. So I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked you on the last one here. What are potential negatives, drawbacks, perceived issues that happen in your industry or happen at your company that you need to address? Again, we can't be the ostrich that buries our head in the sand that hopes that the problem goes away, because the problem doesn't go away. If there's an elephant in the room, we've got to address it. So that's what I'd encourage you to do. 2 more with the big 5. We're going to talk about comparisons real fast. Now here, I'm going to ask you all to participate in the chat pane on this one. So I want you all to put yourselves in a scenario here. I want you to imagine that you were a job recruiter and you've been trying to hire for this role for months, and you're sitting across from somebody who is the perfect specimen for this role. It's like, gosh, if we could have this person, it'd be amazing. And they say to you, I like y'all. I might want to come work here, but I'm also talking with this other company that does things a little bit differently. I want you to put in the chat pane, how are most recruiters going to respond in that moment when basically they're sitting across from somebody who's amazing and they want them, right? They've been trying to fill this position for a while, and they mention, I'm looking at something else as well. How do you feel most recruiters are going to respond in that moment? Paul says they're going to bash the competitor, right? Could be. They could say, well, it's not really quite the way that we do things. This is probably a better option for you. Even if they don't, and they don't respond in that moment with anything other than that could be an option for you, it does not look good for anybody. The only real way to deal with that is to address it head on. I like what Jesse said in here too. Ask what is enticing at the other place, which is the right question to ask, by the way, to try and understand how they're thinking about this. But the fact is, for most folks, they are not going to like to talk about competing options. But again, if they have the worry, the fear, the doubt, the question, they ask you answer as spouses, we have to address it. And so this was a problem for ATS as well, because they're not everything for everybody. So they've produced things like working for small trucking companies versus mid-size versus large trucking companies. If you look at the first few parts of this article, by the way, I think it's really exemplifies what they ask you answer is always about. So while ATS is a mid-sized trucking carrier, I've worked in the trucking industry since I was a teenager. So I've spent time at both large and small and everything in between. You're going to get in this article an unbiased view of each carrier that includes the differences and the pros and cons. Now, I want you just to realize how we're addressing this concern. We're saying, ultimately, you want to make the best decision. Here are the things you should consider to make the best decision for you. If somebody's truly not a good fit for your organization, wouldn't you rather get ahead of it before you hire them rather than 6 months later? The studies show that 30% of new hires quit within the first 90 days. That should be something we're all talking about, right? We missed something big if they're quitting within the first 90 days. I would argue they weren't fully informed on what they were getting into. They hadn't really looked through all of the options. Again, these are our decisions to address these things or not. A couple other examples of this: company driver versus independent trucking contractor, and pros and cons of being a truck driver. Again, establishing both the pros and the cons of the thing, so they go in eyes wide open of what they're getting into in a particular role. Last part of the big five, we're going to talk about best and reviews. We're going to combine these two because they are very similar in many ways. A few things that I love that ATS has done that has absolutely changed the game for them is they've been now willing to talk about who are some of the other options out there, who are some of the competitors, if you will, that people could go and work for. The fact of the matter is, they were having to address this question anyways. Came up all the time. People would say, I might want to work for you, but who are some other people I might talk to? And they weren't really great at responding to that. So instead, they said, you know what? We're going to just openly talk about this. You can see this is an old screenshot, but the amount of views on these things just continues to go up. People love learning about this stuff from ATS, and they're falling in love with them in the process of becoming informed, which is really amazing. My favorite example, and this is maybe one of my favorite examples that they ask you answer in my entire 7 years of teaching people how to do this. A big problem for these folks, and this might be for you too, is that there's this thing called review sites where people can leave their basically anything they want. They can talk about whatever they want. They can give you 1 stars, 5 stars, and just completely trash your reputation. Because of the volume of drivers that they work with, they had some bad reviews out there. Can't hide from them. They're there. Can't take them down. So they were going to have to address this. And here's how they did it. Rather than just allowing people to go and see those and maybe ask questions when they talk to them, they said, you know what? We're going to actually make content where we address these. And so you've got basically mean tweet style, bad Anderson Trucking Service reviews. And in this video, Joe, my man Joe here, is actually responding to the bad feedback. And they start this video off. Here's the most beautiful thing. They start the video off. They say, if you're watching this video, you're probably looking for some dirt on Anderson Trucking Service. We're going to give it to you in this video. I mean, holy smokes, talk about addressing the elephant in the room. This is the epitome of getting out in front of a problem. The greatest thing about this is that today, if you go and search for Anderson Trucking Service reviews, the first video result you're going to see is from them, and it's the bad stuff because it's probably what you were looking for anyways. But they're the ones that are going to give it to you. These are all choices. The big five are all choices. We can address these things or we don't address these things. But here is what we know, and we can see it in the studies, is that a recruit that is out there that might be uninformed about the industry, might be uninformed about your company, might be uninformed about the specific role, they're eventually going to become informed. Eventually they will. So the question is, who do we want them to fall in love with in the process of becoming informed? My hope is that it would be you, and that we would address those things that people really want to know when they're looking for a job. Like I said, it'd be my wish for you to have a full pipeline of people that whenever you need to hire, you can just go and pluck them out. It'd be great.